They say life begins at 70, but mine had crumbled long before that. I was 72 when I first sat behind the wheel of a rideshare car, not as a passenger but as a driver. My hands trembled slightly as I adjusted the seat, more from shame than from age. Outside, the world rushed by, indifferent. I hadn't felt useful in years. That morning, I put on the only collared shirt I still owned. It was neatly pressed, though a bit faded, just like me. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. My face had lines deep as the roads I would soon drive. My eyes, once sharp and defiant, looked tired. Still, I whispered to myself, "You've survived worse." I didn't become a driver because I wanted to. My pension barely covered the rent, and after my wife passed away, I couldn't make sense of staying home, staring at her empty chair, listening to a silence that had teeth. My children, well, I'll talk about them another day. Let's just say they had their lives. I was not part of them, so I signed up, downloaded the app, took the online training, passed the background check faster than I thought. Apparently, having lived quietly and painfully made me trustworthy. My first ride request buzzed in at 6:12 a.m. I almost ignored it. I stared at the screen, heart pounding, but I accepted. The passenger's name was Brandon, no photo, pickup location, a college dorm. I drove slowly. The streets were still blue with dawn. Birds chirped, as if mocking the anxiety that filled my chest. When I pulled up, a young man, barely 20, opened the door and glanced inside. His eyes paused at me. "You're my driver?" I nodded. "Damn, thought I got someone younger. I'm late, man." He got in, didn't say another word, just tapped at his phone, chewing gum loudly. I merged into traffic, careful not to show the shake in my hands. "Can you go faster?" he snapped after 5 minutes. I didn't respond. I was going the speed limit. I always did. When we arrived, he didn't say thank you.
He slammed the door and walked off. 5 stars. I didn't even get eye contact. I sat there for a moment, staring at the empty seat. A strange shame filled me. I used to manage a library, speak at community events, even helped kids learn to read. And now? I was just a button in someone's app. But still, I pressed, "Ready for next ride." The day continued like that. Ride after ride, faces blurring into each other. Some polite, most not. A couple of teenage girls laughed when I asked them to buckle up. One man asked me why someone my age would still be working. I told him, "Because I can." He just laughed and shook his head like I was some tragic joke. Lunch was a sandwich eaten alone in the car, parked under a dying tree. The bread was dry, the silence drier. I thought about quitting, just ending the shift, deleting the app, and walking into the kind of oblivion society reserves for the elderly. Invisible, irrelevant, forgotten. But as I stared out the windshield, a memory came to me. Years ago, I took my daughter to her first school play. She was a tree in the background, barely had lines, but I cheered as if she were the star. Afterwards, she hugged me so tightly, saying, "Daddy, you came." Back then, I mattered. I was someone's reason to smile. I gripped the wheel tighter. I would not go gently into that good night. Not yet. By late afternoon, I had completed 11 rides. My body ached. My knees screamed every time I stepped out. But something odd happened. A woman in her 50s, clearly tired from work, got in the back seat and softly said, "Thank you for driving, sir. These apps don't pay you what you deserve." I blinked. She didn't have to say that. But she did. Her kindness felt like water on cracked soil. Later, as I pulled into my building's small parking lot, I checked the stats. I had made $58 that day. Not much, but it was honest. Before getting out, I looked into the rearview mirror again. Same wrinkles, same tired eyes. But something had changed. I was still here, still driving, still trying. And somewhere deep inside, I felt something flicker. Hope. They don't look at me. Not really. Most passengers glance at their phones, their reflections, or the window, but rarely at the man driving the car. To them, I'm not a person. I'm part of the vehicle, a function, a service, a ghost with a steering wheel. I learned quickly that silence rides with you more than any stranger. Some say a word or two, others grunt or gesture, but many don't acknowledge I exist beyond the app that summoned me. On my third day, I picked up a young woman from a high-rise downtown. She wore headphones and didn't say a word as she got in. Midway through the ride, she began crying, quietly, but unmistakably. Her shoulders trembled. I said nothing, afraid that asking would somehow break an unspoken rule. When we reached her stop, she got out and said only, 5 stars, like it was a password to end a transaction. Her face was streaked with tears, but she didn't seem to notice or care that I noticed. I sat there a moment, wondering how many people carry heartbreak like carry-on luggage. Heavy, silent, invisible to everyone but themselves. And yet, not one of them sees me. One afternoon, I picked up 3 young men from a corporate tower. They wore suits and smelled like money and ego. As soon as they got in, they started talking loudly, laughing at things I didn't understand. "Dude, this guy looks like my grandpa," one of them said, not bothering to lower his voice. "Bet he fought in the Civil War," another joked. They laughed like I wasn't there, like I was deaf, like I was dead. I didn't say a word. Not because I couldn't, but because I had learned something far more powerful than anger, restraint. Let them laugh. Let them think age is weakness. One day, if life's fair, they'll wear these same wrinkles and realize they weren't so funny after all. But still, it stung. At red lights, I'd catch my reflection in the side mirror. Sometimes I wondered, had I become invisible? Was there a moment, an exact day, when the world stopped seeing me? Back when I worked at the library, people would shake my hand, listen to me, ask for my thoughts. Now, I'm a name on a screen, a car icon inching toward their location. One night, after a long shift, I stopped at a gas station. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. As I filled the tank, a little boy stood nearby holding a slushy cup. He couldn't have been older than 6. He stared at me. I smiled gently. "Evening." He didn't answer, just kept looking. His mother came rushing out of the store. "Come on, don't bother the man," she said, tugging his hand. He looked up at her and whispered, "But he looks like Santa." She froze. I chuckled. "Only if Santa drives a 2013 sedan." She smiled apologetically, then walked away quickly. But for a moment, I was seen. By a child. And somehow that mattered. That same week, a woman in her 70s got in my car. She had a cane and wore a wide-brimmed hat. As she settled in, she said, "A driver with silver hair. What a delight." I laughed. "There's more silver than hair left." She smiled. "Silver is earned." We talked the whole ride, about books, about gardens, about loneliness. She told me she lived alone and hadn't had a real conversation in weeks. As I dropped her off, she touched my arm and said, "You're the kindest stranger I've met in years." I watched her walk slowly toward her apartment, cane tapping softly against the pavement. Not all passengers are blind. Some are just tired. Some are hurting. Some are hoping someone like me will listen, even if just for 10 minutes between destinations. I've started keeping a small notebook in the glove compartment. Not to write names. That would be wrong. But to jot down moments, glimpses. Things people say in passing that remind me life is still happening everywhere, even in silence. Like the man who said, "I haven't told my wife I lost my job." Or the woman who whispered, "I'm going to my first date in 20 years." Or the teenager who asked, "Do you think my mom's proud of me?" None of them looked at me when they said it, but I heard them. I carry those voices with me. They don't see me, but I see them. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. People assume I started driving for extra money. They're wrong. I started because I lost everything that made life worth living. Her name was Evelyn, my wife, my compass, my soft place to land. We were married for 48 years. Not all perfect, but real, deep. The kind of love that ages like oak, slow, steady, unshakable. Evelyn passed away on a Monday morning. I still remember the smell of rain on the sidewalk outside the hospital window. The quiet beeping of the machine that suddenly stopped. The silence that followed, heavier than any sound. For weeks after her death, I moved through life like a ghost. I'd make 2 cups of tea out of habit, then pour hers down the sink. I'd reach for her hand in bed, then feel only cold sheets. Our house became a museum of memories. Her scent lingered in the closet. Her favorite cardigan still hung on the chair she always used. I couldn't bring myself to move anything. It felt like betraying her. My children came around for a while. They brought flowers, food, promises. Then, life called them back. Meetings, babies, vacations. I understood. I did. But each visit grew shorter, each hug more distracted. I became something they scheduled. And then came the call. It was my son, Mark. "Dad, we've been thinking, maybe you should consider selling the house. Move into something smaller, maybe one of those senior communities. You'd have company, meals, activities." Activities. I didn't want activities. I wanted my wife. But I said nothing. A month later, I agreed to sell. Not because I wanted to, because I was tired of being the anchor that made them feel guilty. I moved into a small apartment on the edge of town. It had beige walls, beige carpet, beige silence. No garden, no neighbors who knew my name. Just rows of identical doors hiding quiet, lonely lives. And then came the bills. Evelyn had always managed the money. After her passing, I realized how fragile everything was. My pension barely covered the rent. I dipped into savings for groceries, sold a few pieces of furniture, even let go of her piano. That one hurt. But the worst was the silence. You see, when you retire, people stop asking what you do. Then one day, they stop asking how you are. There were entire weeks I didn't speak to a soul. One morning, I walked past a cafe and saw a man no older than me delivering food in a worn-out uniform. He looked tired, but purposeful. That night, I Googled jobs for seniors. There weren't many, but one ad caught my eye. Drive on your own schedule, earn on your terms. It sounded possible. The next day, I borrowed a neighbor's Wi-Fi, created an email account, signed up, and waited. I didn't tell anyone. Not my children. Not even the landlord. I was embarrassed. A man my age, starting over. But I wasn't ready to disappear. Not yet. The training was simple. But the emotions were not. I felt like a fraud. Like I was pretending to be part of a world that had already left me behind. But then I remembered Evelyn. She used to say, "Reinvention is the soul's way of surviving." She was always wiser than me. And so, I began. Every ride became more than a paycheck. It was a step out of the shadows, a chance to feel needed, even if only for a few minutes. I wasn't just driving people, I was driving myself back to life. Still, some days are hard. The loneliness doesn't vanish. The ache for Evelyn still visits me in the quiet hours before dawn. But at least now, when I wake up, I have a reason to get dressed, to step outside, to be part of the world again, even if the world barely notices. I started over not because I had to, but because I couldn't bear the silence anymore. And in that decision, painful as it was, I began to reclaim something I thought was gone forever. My dignity. It was an ordinary Tuesday. Clouds hung low like they were carrying secrets. I had just finished a long ride across the city, 2 teenagers arguing about who cheated on whom. I barely said a word. Just drove, just listened. As always. I parked near an old bookstore downtown. I liked the quiet there. Sometimes I'd eat a sandwich in the car, pretending I was just out for a drive, not working to keep the lights on. Then the app buzzed. Pickup. Claire, I accepted without thinking. The location was only 2 blocks away. I drove slowly, the air heavy with coming rain. As I approached, I saw her. A woman standing under a burgundy umbrella, wearing a red coat that somehow made the whole street seem colorless. She looked to be in her 60s. Elegant, upright posture. Not rushed, not distracted, just composed. Like time bent slightly around her. She opened the door carefully and stepped in with grace. The scent of jasmine followed her. "Good afternoon," she said, voice soft but clear. "Thank you for being on time." I nodded. Of course. I started driving. For once, the silence wasn't awkward. It was respectful, weighted, alive. She looked out the window for a long time before speaking again. "You have kind eyes," she said, without looking at me. I blinked, surprised. "That's kind of you to say." "I don't say things I don't mean," she replied, then finally turned toward me. Her eyes met mine, and for a moment, I felt something stir, a recognition I couldn't quite place. "You look familiar," I said before I could stop myself. She tilted her head, studying me. "What's your name?" she asked, not cautiously, but with gentle curiosity. "Walter," I said. "Walter Emerson." She smiled, but it wasn't amusement. It was memory. "Of course," she whispered. "Walter." I nearly missed the turn. I glanced at her again, heart suddenly pounding. "I'm sorry. Have we met?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked back out the window. I knew a Walter Emerson once, a long time ago. He had ink-stained fingers and carried books like they were treasure. I froze. That wasn't a common detail. I used to help in a library at the university where I met Evelyn, before I became head librarian, before the war, before life got complicated. I used to work at a campus library, I said slowly. She nodded. So did I. The pieces started falling into place like leaves in autumn. I looked at her again. "Claire Richardson?" She smiled. "Well, you do remember." It was like stepping into a photograph buried in a drawer for decades. We had known each other. Not lovers, not quite friends, but something in between. Shared glances over dusty books, silent laughs, almosts. I remembered her handwriting in the margin of poetry books, her laugh echoing in stairwells, her red scarf. "I haven't heard your name in 40 years, I whispered. 48, she corrected gently. But who's counting? We rode in silence for a moment, but not the kind I'd grown used to. This one buzzed with the weight of old days, of things left unsaid, of time collapsing into the space between breaths. She finally said, "You disappeared." I nodded slowly. Life pulled me in another direction. Doesn't it always? The ride was short, but it felt like a chapter reopening. As I pulled up to her destination, a modest brick building with ivy on the side, she didn't rush out like others. She sat for a second longer. "I don't believe in coincidence," she said. "Only timing." Then she reached into her bag, pulled out a 20, and handed it to me. I tried to refuse. "The fare is already paid through the app." She smiled. "This is for you, not the ride." I took it, more out of shock than need. As she stepped out, she turned one last time. "I hope this isn't the last time we meet, Walter." And then she was gone. But the jasmine lingered. I sat there, engine running, heart racing like I was 20 again. Claire Richardson, the woman in red. Some doors never really close. They just wait for you to find them again. She said my name like it never left her lips. Walter. The sound of it, spoken by her voice, cracked something in me I didn't know was still fragile. That name, my name, spoken not with formality, but familiarity. Not with politeness, but remembrance. All night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying that ride in my head. The red coat, her calm gaze, The way she didn't rush to fill silence with chatter, but chose her words like someone who had lived long enough to know silence is a language too. I remembered Claire Richardson. She was never loud, but always present. We were young then. I was 22, working as an assistant at the university library, still finishing my degree. She was already a graduate student, older by a few years, confident in a way that made you straighten your spine just to stand near her. Claire had a quiet beauty, yes, but what I remember most was how she listened. When she looked at you, it was as if she could hear even the words you didn't say. Back then, I was dating Evelyn already. We were serious, on the path to marriage. But there were moments when Claire and I would speak in the back corner of the library after closing hours, dust dancing in the air between us like fireflies. We'd share poetry books and long conversations about Camus, Rilke, Baldwin. One night, we sat side by side, knees nearly touching, reading a passage from Neruda. She didn't speak when I finished, just looked at me, eyes glowing with something unspoken. And I, coward or loyal, I still don't know, stood up and said, "See you tomorrow." We never spoke like that again. And then she left. Transferred, they said. Or maybe she chose to vanish before I could. Now, 48 years later, she was in the back of my car. And she remembered my name. I couldn't let it go. I checked the app's history. Found her drop-off location. I knew it was borderline inappropriate, maybe even foolish. But I drove by the building the next morning, pretending to be looking for parking. There she was, walking down the steps, that same red coat. No umbrella this time. Her silver hair was tied in a low twist, elegant as ever. She moved slowly but not weakly, like someone who knew where they were going and had no reason to rush. I drove on, didn't stop, didn't say a word, but I knew I'd see her again. And I did. 4 days later, another ride request. Pickup, Claire. I smiled. As she got in, she gave me a look that said she was hoping it would be me. "Well," she said softly, "seems fate enjoys repetition. Or maybe fate's just reminding us of something we forgot," I replied before thinking. She raised an eyebrow. "Did we forget, Walter? Or did we bury?" We drove in silence for a few minutes. Then she added, "You disappeared. I got married, had children, responsibilities. Life has a way of redirecting dreams." She nodded. "So does fear." That hit harder than I expected. "I never stopped wondering where you went," she continued. "I saw your wedding announcement. Thought maybe I imagined all of it. You didn't." There it was. The truth. Simple. Heavy. "I admired you," I said finally. "You were brilliant. Untouchable. I didn't think I had the right to want anything more than our conversations." She smiled, eyes on the road ahead. "You always had the right. You just didn't claim it." When I dropped her off, she lingered again. "I walk here every Tuesday morning," she said. "To the bookstore down the street." Then she stepped out. And I realized. That was an invitation. She remembered me. And now, I remembered her. But more importantly, I remembered a version of myself I thought was gone. There are loves we choose, and loves we turn away from. Claire was the latter. Not because I didn't feel it, but because I did. Back then, I was a different man. Younger, yes, but also more afraid. Afraid of disrupting what seemed secure. Afraid of what people might think. Afraid of the aching truth that life sometimes offers two paths, and choosing one means letting the other vanish forever. But Claire, she was the path not taken. The road I didn't dare explore. I remember the day it almost happened. It was the last week of October, 1975. The trees outside the university blazed red and gold, like fire licking the edges of every sidewalk. I was shelving books when she walked in, wearing a navy coat and holding a small brown envelope. "I brought you something," she said, placing it in my hand. It was a pressed maple leaf between two sheets of wax paper, with a quote written beneath it in perfect cursive. "Autumn carries more gold in its pocket than all the other seasons." Jim Bishop. "Thought you'd like it," she said. I did. Too much. We sat in the back corner of the library, as we often did, under the stained glass window, where late afternoon light always fell like blessing. She read a poem aloud. I still remember her voice, the way it dipped and rose. And when she finished, she looked at me, her eyes soft but steady. "I sometimes wonder what you'd be like if you let yourself be loved outside the lines," she whispered. I didn't answer. Couldn't. Because I knew what she meant. And I knew I was already spoken for. Evelyn and I had met the year before. She was kind, warm, devoted. She dreamed of family, of a house with a garden, of a steady life. She was everything good, everything safe. But Claire was possibility. She was fire and rain and poetry in motion. Being near her made me feel alive. That afternoon, as the light faded, she reached out and touched my hand. Her fingers were cool, certain. I pulled mine away, and just like that, she smiled, small and sad, and stood up. "I hope life gives you what you're looking for, Walter," she said, "even if it's not me." She left the library. 2 weeks later, I heard she'd transferred to another program in New York. No goodbye, no note, just gone. And I buried it. That ache, that almost love. I married Evelyn the following spring. We built a beautiful life. 2 children, holidays, quiet Sunday mornings with the newspaper and coffee. She loved me deeply, and I her. I don't regret a moment with her, not one. But part of me always wondered, what if? That kind of wondering doesn't shout, it whispers. In old books, in the scent of jasmine, in red coats on grey days. Now, sitting behind the wheel with Claire again, I could feel time folding in on itself. What had we been, really? A memory? A missed chapter? Or something unfinished? After our second ride, I couldn't stop thinking about her. I'd park near the bookstore on Tuesdays, hoping I might see her again. Sometimes I did, sometimes I didn't. But always. I waited. And one morning, she walked up to the car and tapped gently on the window. "I'm not going anywhere today," she said. "But would you like to sit and have coffee with me?" We found a small cafe around the corner. Brick walls, old jazz playing low, mismatched chairs. She ordered tea. I had black coffee. For the first 10 minutes, we didn't talk about the past. We talked about now. Books we'd read. Foods we'd learned to cook during the pandemic. The aches that come with age. And the strange peace, too. Then she leaned in slightly and said, "Did you ever think of me?" I met her eyes. "Too often." She nodded slowly. I tried not to be angry, but part of me was. You knew, you felt it, and still. I was a coward, I admitted. "No," she said gently. "You were loyal. There's a difference. But loyalty can be its own kind of silence." We sat in that truth. Let it breathe.
Then she smiled. "I never married," she said. "Not really. There were chances, but I think I was always waiting for something that felt like you. That nearly broke me. All those years, I thought I had buried a passing infatuation. But for her, it had been more. A shadow that stayed. Before we parted, she reached across the table and took my hand again. This time, I didn't pull away. There's a kind of silence that doesn't ask to be filled. That morning, sitting across from Claire at the cafe, I felt that silence settle between us, not as a wall, but as a gentle breath, as if time itself were holding its breath, waiting for her to speak. She stirred her tea slowly, eyes watching the swirl as if it could tell her future. "I didn't transfer because I wanted to," she finally said. "I left because I had no choice." I sat up straighter. Claire wasn't the kind of woman who used words carelessly. If she said something had forced her to leave, I knew it wasn't trivial. "I was pregnant," she said. her voice barely louder than the music playing in the background. The world stopped. I felt my heart miss a beat, then another. I didn't know for sure until 2 weeks after I left, she continued. By then I had already accepted the scholarship in New York. I told myself it was better that way. I swallowed. My mouth had gone dry. You didn't tell me? No, she said quietly. I didn't, because you were already gone in a way. Your heart was with her, and I refused to be the woman who destroyed a home that hadn't even been built yet. I looked at her hands, steady, graceful, the same hands that had once touched mine in that library corner. What happened? I asked, not sure if I wanted the answer. I miscarried, she said, just like that, no drama, no tears. But her eyes carried decades of pain. I was alone, in a city that didn't care. I didn't have anyone to tell, so I didn't tell anyone. I felt a weight settle in my chest that no amount of breath could move. She'd carried that pain, alone, silently. While I'd gone on with my life, married, children, holidays, she had folded that part of her life into the corners of herself and moved forward as best she could. I used to see you in dreams, she said. Sometimes I'd wake up and still smell that old library. And I'd wonder if you ever thought of me, even for a second. I nodded. I did, more than I admitted to myself. But I thought, you chose to leave. In a way, I did, she said. But not because I stopped caring. I left because I did care, and I knew what staying would do. To you, to me, to the woman you loved. A long pause followed. You were the only man I ever imagined a life with, she said, finally looking at me again. And I let that life go, so that you could have yours. My throat tightened. I don't know what to say, I whispered. You don't have to say anything, she replied. You've lived your truth. I've lived mine. And maybe now, we can stop living separately. That afternoon, we didn't touch again, but the air between us had changed. The burden of memory, of unspoken grief, of what-ifs, it had all been laid bare. And in its place, something else began to grow. Not romance, not yet, but understanding, mutual recognition, two lives weathered by time, finally walking beside each other again. As I dropped her off, she turned and said, I don't want to rewrite the past, Walter, but I wouldn't mind writing the rest with someone who understands. I nodded. I'd like that too. She stepped out into the light, and for the first time in decades, the future didn't feel like a fading echo. It felt like a possibility. She started booking rides without destinations, no appointments, no errands, just a time and a place to be picked up. I don't need to go anywhere today, she'd say, sliding into the back seat with that familiar calm. Just drive. At first I hesitated. The app didn't care where we went, but something inside me did. I wasn't a chauffeur. I wasn't a man for hire, but I was hers, at least for those miles. We began to wander. Some days we followed the river. Other days we let the lights of downtown lead us. Once we ended up on a hill overlooking the city. She asked me to stop, rolled down the window, and simply closed her eyes to the wind. This, she whispered, is the sound of being alive. No one had ever said that to me. No one had ever needed to. But with Claire, silence wasn't empty. It was an offering. One afternoon I asked, why don't we go anywhere? She looked at me through the rearview mirror, her eyes quiet and certain. Because I'm tired of going somewhere just to arrive. I want to go nowhere just to feel the road again. That stayed with me, so we kept driving. The conversations became deeper, softer. She told me about the years in New York, about teaching literature at a small community college, about the students who reminded her of me, restless, full of questions, hiding fear behind quiet eyes. I kept your leaf, I confessed one day. She turned her head slowly. What? The maple leaf, from the library. It's still inside my old copy of Neruda. She didn't smile. Her lips trembled. I didn't think you remembered. I never forgot, I said. The car filled with something warmer than heat. heavier than memory. Still, we never touched. Not a hand, not a kiss. Not yet. But something was growing, unrushed, unspoken, unbreakable. She started bringing music, old jazz, soft folk, sometimes classical. She'd plug in her phone, and we'd glide through city streets like we were dancing on asphalt. "You always drive like the world might crack if you rush," she said once. I smiled. Maybe it already has. One Sunday we ended up at the pier. Seagulls circled, and the air smelled of salt and rust. She asked me to park. We sat there for nearly an hour, watching the tide come in, the boats bobbing in place. "I used to think love was a storm," she said, "loud, wild, consuming." "And now?" I asked. "Now I think it's a tide, quiet, relentless, patient." I didn't reply, but I knew she was right. As the weeks passed, our rides became rituals. We didn't need reasons anymore. Sometimes she brought coffee in a thermos. Other times I'd pack sandwiches. Once she read aloud a short story as I drove through a rain-soaked afternoon. "You make me feel like I was never lost," she said, her voice barely above the sound of tires on wet pavement. I wanted to answer, but I couldn't. Not yet. Because the truth was, I was starting to fear how much I needed her. And with that fear came the familiar instinct to pull away. But I didn't, because for the first time in years, my heart wasn't waiting for something to end. It was waiting for something to begin. It started with a voicemail. "Dad, call me when you get this. It's important." Mark's voice was clipped, cold even. I felt the familiar knot tighten in my stomach. That quiet dread only a parent knows, when your child stops sounding like your child and starts sounding like a stranger. I called him back that night. "Are you driving people around, Dad?" he asked, skipping any greeting. I cleared my throat. "Yes, a few hours a day." "For money?" "Yes." There was silence, then a slow, exasperated sigh. "Why didn't you ask us for help?" I leaned back in my chair. The room around me felt too big, too empty. "Because I didn't want help," I said. "I wanted purpose." "You're 72. "Yes, not 72 dead." He didn't laugh. "It's embarrassing, Dad. One of my colleagues saw you picking someone up near the financial district. He recognized you." "Recognized me?" I said quietly. "From what? The family photos you keep hidden in your drawer?" That hit harder than I meant it to. Mark paused, then with a colder tone, "Look, I'm just saying, there are other ways. You don't need to be driving strangers around like some kind of what, Mark?" "A cab driver," he snapped. And there it was, that word, that tone. As if dignity had an expiration date, as if work, honest work, was shameful once your hair turned white. "I'm not asking you for approval," I said calmly. "Just letting you know I'm fine." "You don't sound fine. You sound stubborn." We hung up soon after, and I sat in the dark for a long time, staring at the silence. The next morning my daughter called. "Dad," Julie began, her voice softer. "Mark told me about the driving." I braced myself, but she surprised me. "Are you lonely?" That question broke something in me. More than money, more than pride. She saw through the surface. "I was," I said quietly. "I still am some days, but I'm trying." She paused, then gently, "Do you want to come stay with us for a while?" I smiled at the offer, at the thought, but I knew it wasn't real. Not really. Her life was too full. Kids, work, her own fragile marriage. "No, sweetheart," I said. "I've built something here. Small, but mine." She didn't argue, just whispered, "I miss Mom." "I know," I replied. "I miss her too." Later that day, I drove without turning on the app. Just drove. I passed places I hadn't seen in years. The park where we used to take the kids. The bakery Evelyn loved. The school where I'd read poetry during parent nights. So much life left behind. So little of it remembered. That evening I picked up Claire. She noticed immediately. "What happened?" she asked. My children found out. She nodded, and let me guess, they disapproved. They were ashamed. She looked out the window. It's always strange, isn't it? How quickly they forget we're people too. I raised them to be proud, strong, but I never thought they'd confuse pride with pity. She reached forward and gently touched my shoulder. You're not driving to survive, Walter. You're driving to live. That night, we drove without a route again. The city blurred into quiet lights and soft shadows, and in the rearview mirror, I caught her reflection. Serene, proud, quietly defiant, just like me. He got in like any other passenger. Late 20s, earbuds dangling, hoodie half-zipped. He gave me a nod, then returned to his phone. We drove in silence for several minutes before he finally spoke. Man, you don't look like the usual driver. I smiled politely. What does the usual driver look like? You know, younger or bored. You seem like you've lived a life. That caught me off guard. I suppose I have, I said. Most of it behind me, but a bit of it still left. He chuckled. That's a good line. You a writer or something? No, used to be a librarian. He turned toward me, interest sparking. Seriously, where at? We talked. Just a bit. I told him about the university, about books, about Evelyn. Not in detail, just fragments. I'm a journalism grad, he said. Trying to find real stories, stuff people ignore. Well, I said, if you find any, let me know. He smiled. Maybe I already have. The ride ended, and I thought nothing of it. Another young man, another ride, another silent exit. But 2 days later, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Calls, messages, voicemails from old friends. A neighbor knocked on my door. You're on the internet, she said, breathless. What? She showed me a video, a 5-minute clip titled, 72-year-old rideshare driver shares the most beautiful life story you'll hear today. There I was, my voice, my car, a snippet of our conversation, edited with soft music, captions, even old library photos the kid must have pulled from public archives. I didn't know whether to feel flattered or violated. The video had over 300,000 views. By evening, it hit 1 million. Comments poured in. This man speaks like a poem. I called my dad today because of this. Why don't we treat our elders like this every day? I stared at the screen, numb. Claire called that night. I saw it, she said. I didn't know, I replied. I didn't ask for this. I know. That's why it's powerful. The journalist messaged me the next morning, apologetic, but proud. He said people needed to hear voices like mine, that he wanted to film a follow-up. I said no. I wasn't a spectacle. I was a man, doing what he could to stay afloat. Still, the attention changed something. Strangers began recognizing me. A barista gave me coffee for free. A woman in the market thanked me for reminding her how to breathe. But what struck me most were the letters, dozens of them, handwritten, typed, from people across the country. Elderly men saying they felt seen, widows thanking me for saying what they hadn't dared to, grandchildren promising to visit more. One letter ended with, "You gave dignity a voice," and maybe, in some small way, I had, not with rage, not with fame, but with presence. They started calling me the gentleman driver. Radio stations, local news, even a morning TV show reached out. I declined them all. Fame was never my ambition. I didn't want to become a headline or a viral moment. I just wanted to drive, to feel the rhythm of the road beneath me, to listen, to breathe. Still, the world didn't let go so easily. A photo of me went up on a community board with the words, "Ride with Walter, the man with the golden heart." People began requesting me specifically through the app. Not because they needed a ride, but because they wanted a moment with me. A quote, a story, a glimpse into something they thought had disappeared in the noise of modern life. One woman asked if I'd give a speech at her father's retirement party. Another man offered to start a GoFundMe. so I wouldn't have to work anymore. I turned it down. They didn't understand. I wasn't working because I had to. I was working because I wanted to, because each mile, each ride reminded me that I was still part of something, that I hadn't faded away. But it was exhausting, being seen all the time after years of invisibility. Fame, even the gentle kind, is a strange weight. People expect you to say something wise, to always be grateful, to always be kind. But I wasn't anyone's saint. I was just a man who missed his wife and found a reason to keep moving. Claire noticed the change. "You're quieter," she said one day as we drove along the coast. "Too many people talking at me," I replied. "Not enough talking with me?" She nodded. "They want your wisdom, but they don't want your loneliness." That struck deep, because it was true. Most people want to be inspired, but they don't want to sit in the dark with you. Claire did. She never asked me for stories anymore. She just rode with me. Sometimes she brought books to read aloud. Other times she stared out the window and let the silence hold us both. "I think," she said once, "you're not a symbol. You're a mirror." I frowned. "A mirror?" "People see in you what they've lost. Time, kindness, someone who listens. But they don't see you, Walter, not really." "And you?" She smiled softly. "I see the man I waited for." That evening, I parked at the hill where we'd gone weeks before. We sat in the car watching the city flicker below like a field of tiny stars. And for the first time since the video, I felt peace. Let them watch. Let them listen. But let me live. In my car, in these quiet roads, with her. She didn't show up on Tuesday or Thursday or the following Sunday. No ride requests, no bookstore walks, no music playlists waiting on her phone. Claire was gone. At first I told myself she might be out of town, visiting family, taking a break from the noise after the video. She was a private woman after all. Maybe she needed space. But by the end of the week, the silence wasn't just quiet. It was hollow, empty in a way I hadn't felt since Evelyn's funeral. I drove past her building. Twice, no sign of her, curtains drawn, mail beginning to pile up in the small box by the entrance. I didn't knock, I didn't call. I didn't even know if she'd given me her real number. Ours was a connection carved through time, not technology. Still, my chest tightened with each passing day. I began imagining things. Had she fallen? Had something happened to her health? Had I misunderstood everything? Was I just another passing kindness in her life while she had become something more in mine? Each day I drove, I half expected her to step out from a bookstore or wave from a corner or simply appear in the rearview mirror like a familiar ghost. But she never did. Passengers came and went. Faces, names, destinations, none of them hers. And with each ride I spoke less, smiled less, watched the clock more. The city kept moving, but I began to drift. One night I parked at the hill again. Her seat was empty. The city lights below flickered, indifferent. I thought of the pressed maple leaf, the poetry, the tea, the rides to nowhere. What if that was all we had? What if she had come back into my life only to remind me what I once lost? And what if this time I lost it again? It was taped to my windshield. A small cream-colored envelope with my name written in delicate slanted script, Walter. I recognized the handwriting instantly. My hands trembled as I peeled it from the glass. I sat in the car, engine off, heart pounding like I was back in my 20s again. I didn't open it right away, not out of fear, out of reverence. After a few breaths, I tore it gently along the fold. Inside was a single page. Walter, I'm sorry for disappearing. I didn't want to, truly, but life, mine, is beginning to close its doors faster than I expected. I've been sick for a while. I didn't tell you. Not because I didn't trust you, but because I wanted the time we had to be untouched by pity, or plans, or timelines. You gave me something no one else could, the feeling that I had not been forgotten, that I still mattered, our drives. They were the first time in years I felt seen without being studied, loved without being claimed. I've started hospice care at home. I don't know how many good days I have left, but I do have one request if you're willing. Come see me. Not to say goodbye, but to say everything else. I'll be here, same building, 3rd floor. The door will be open. With all my heart, Claire. The words blurred as I read them again and again. Hospice. The word hit harder than any silence ever could. I started the car. I didn't care what time it was. I didn't care that my shift hadn't even begun. The road no longer felt like escape. It felt like a lifeline. 20 minutes later, I was parked outside her building. The ivy still crawled up the brick. Her curtains were no longer drawn. I climbed the steps slowly, not because my knees ached, but because I didn't want to waste a single second rushing through what might be the last time I'd walk toward her. The door was open, just as she'd said, and there she was, sitting by the window, wrapped in a soft gray shawl, smiling through her frailty. "Walter," she whispered. "I got your letter," I said. She nodded. "I knew you would." And in that moment, I understood. Love isn't about time. It's about presence. I sat by her window every afternoon after that, no longer as her driver, no longer as a man waiting for something to begin, but simply as Walter, her Walter. Claire's health was fading fast like the light in those early evenings when we used to drive without destination. Her voice grew softer, her hands colder, but her eyes, those never dimmed. She insisted on sitting by the window each day. "So I don't forget the world is still moving," she said. I read to her, Neruda, Rilke, Baldwin. Sometimes nothing at all, just my own thoughts. Sometimes we sat in silence, her head resting lightly against my shoulder as if the weight of her years could finally let go. One morning she whispered, "Take me for one last ride." I hesitated. "Are you sure?" She nodded. "I want to feel the city breathe one more time." So I carried her gently down the stairs, wrapped her in that red coat, propped her with cushions in the back seat. Her seat, we drove. The streets were quieter than usual. Or maybe I was just listening more closely. Claire didn't say much, but her eyes wandered like they were memorizing every shadow and light, every window, every tree. She asked to pass the pier, the bakery, the bookstore, and finally, the hill, the one that watched over the city like a tired guardian. I parked at the top. She looked out the window, barely moving. "This," she whispered, "is how I want to remember the world." I turned to face her. Her eyes met mine. No fear, no regret, just love. "I'm not afraid anymore," she said, "because I got to come home before I left." Tears ran down my cheeks. "I should have found you sooner," I said. She smiled gently. "No, you found me exactly when I needed you most." We stayed until the sun dipped low and the lights below began to shimmer. Then I drove her home, carried her back up the stairs, tucked her into the same chair by the window. Before I left, she reached for my hand and said, "Walter, that was the ride of my life." She closed her eyes and rested. Claire passed away 3 days later, peacefully, in her sleep. The nurse said she smiled just before her final breath. I was there, holding her hand, reading the same poem she had once read to me in that dusty library so many decades ago. The funeral was quiet, just the way she wanted. No speeches, no spectacle, just a gathering of those who had truly known her and loved her for who she was, not what she left behind. Afterward, I returned to my car. I sat in the front seat. Her scent still lingered faintly, jasmine and something older, something eternal. I didn't drive that day, or the day after. I just sat, watching the sky change, listening to the engine hum in silence, grieving, yes, but also remembering. Claire had given me back something I didn't know I'd lost. Not just love, not even hope, but permission. Permission to live without waiting for purpose to come knocking, to give without asking, to begin again at any age. Eventually, I turned the ignition. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to, and I began to drive, not fast, not far, just enough to feel the road beneath me again. The world outside was the same, but I was not. And every mile since then, I carry her with me, in the quiet, in the curves of the road, in the music she left on a flash drive tucked in the glove box. Sometimes I play her favorite track, soft piano over falling rain, and I swear I can hear her laugh between the notes. She was my final passenger, and also my beginning. To anyone listening to this, I say, don't wait. Don't wait for the perfect time, the perfect words, or the perfect version of yourself. Drive into the light, even if the road is uncertain, even if your hands shake on the wheel, because somewhere out there, someone is waiting to be seen, and someone else, maybe even you, is waiting to be found. Life has a way of surprising us, sometimes through pain, sometimes through memory, but if we're lucky, through love that arrives when we no longer expect it. Walter's journey wasn't about driving, it was about reclaiming presence, dignity, and the courage to open his heart again when most people would have already closed the door. Claire reminded us that love isn't always loud. It can be a quiet seat in the back of a car, a familiar voice reading a poem, or a final ride with no destination, just meaning. And in that stillness, they both found what we all long for, to be seen, to be heard, to be held gently by someone who understands. Did this story touch you in some way? Have you ever reconnected with someone from your past or found purpose again after losing it? We'd love to hear your heart in the comments below.